The pit is dry, and the dark inside it has a weight Joseph has never felt before. 17 years old, and the rope burns on his wrists are still raw where his brothers bound them. Above him, a circle of blinding sky and silhouettes moving against it. Men he has shared a tent with his whole life, arguing now in voices stripped of any pretense of brotherhood. He calls out. No one answers. Flies gather in the heat, clinging to the cistern's dry clay walls. Somewhere not far off, bells. The soft clatter of pack animals moving along the trade road south. Men carrying spices and resin bound for a kingdom he has only heard described in his father's stories. A land of rivers and gods and granaries that never empty. He does not yet know that those bells are the sound of his entire life changing, and not, in the end, for the worse he expects. His brothers are talking business now, and the price they settle on for their own blood is 20 pieces of silver. This is Bible Stories Unearthed, where we retell the narratives of Scripture alongside the history, archaeology, and ancient world that give them their full weight. Today, the story of a shepherd's son sold into slavery by his own brothers, and the buried record of Egyptian administration, foreign officials, and ancient famine that gives his extraordinary rise to power its full historical context. Joseph's story begins in the hill country of Canaan, in a world of tents and flocks, where Jacob's large extended family moves with the seasons and wealth is measured in sheep and goats rather than land. It's a fiercely personal world. Family loyalty and a father's open favoritism carry the weight of law. But the story doesn't stay in Canaan. It moves south along a trade corridor linking the hill country to one of the ancient world's true superpowers, Egypt. By the broad era most scholars associate with this narrative, Egypt was already a vast, literate, intensely bureaucratic state. Pharaoh sat at its center as a living god, but beneath him ran an enormous administrative machine. Scribes, granary officials, household stewards, and a vizier managing the kingdom's daily affairs. Egypt's survival depended entirely on the Nile's annual flood, and when the flood failed, famine followed fast, meaning whoever controlled the grain controlled the kingdom's survival. Foreigners from the Levant, recorded in Egyptian texts as Asiatics, were a known presence in Egypt in this era. Traders, laborers, household servants. A foreign-born outsider rising through a great household was unusual. It wasn't unthinkable. Joseph is the 11th of Jacob's sons, but the firstborn to Rachel, the wife Jacob loved most. And Jacob does nothing to hide that favoritism. He gives Joseph a richly made garment, a ketonet pasim, its exact appearance debated by translators ever since, but its meaning unmistakable to everyone in the camp. This son is set apart. Joseph's brothers watch that favoritism settle over him like a second skin, and something in them hardens. It hardens further when Joseph, 17 and apparently untroubled by tact, describes two dreams, sheaves of wheat bowing to his sheaf, the sun, moon, and 11 stars bowing to him. Even his father is unsettled. His brothers stop being able to speak a civil word to him at all. The breaking point comes in a field near Dothan, where the brothers are pasturing flocks far from home. They see Joseph approaching, sent by Jacob to check on them, and years of resentment finally have an opening. Some want him dead outright. Reuben, the eldest, talks them toward a pit instead, privately intending to come back and rescue him. But while Reuben is away, a caravan appears on the road. Judah proposes a different cruelty. Sell him to the traders heading for Egypt, The text names them at different points as both Ishmaelites and Midianites, desert merchants whose routes through Canaan often overlapped. 20 pieces of silver changes hands, and Joseph, robe stripped from him, dreams ringing absurd in his own ears, is led south in chains toward a country he has never seen, while his brothers prepare a lie for their father involving that same robe and a great deal of goat's blood. In Egypt, Joseph is sold into the household of Potiphar, an official described as captain of Pharaoh's guard. And here the story takes its first turn. Joseph does not collapse. He works, and he is good at it, and Potiphar notices. Within a short span, Joseph is overseeing the entire household, because the text tells us simply, the Lord was with him, and that favor was visible enough for even an Egyptian official to act on it. But success in another man's house is fragile. Potiphar's wife takes notice of Joseph too, and when he refuses her advances, repeatedly, deliberately, she turns the refusal into an accusation, holding his discarded garment as false evidence. Potiphar, his pride wounded, has Joseph thrown into prison. Specifically, the text tells us the facility where the king's prisoners were confined. It's a curious restraint. An accusation like this one would typically have carried a far harsher penalty in the ancient Near East, and the text never explains why Joseph was spared it. It is, on the surface, the second great injustice of Joseph's young life. And once again, the narrative refuses to let him stay down. The prison warden notices the same competence Potiphar once did, and Joseph ends up effectively running the place from the inside. It's there that he meets two of Pharaoh's former officials, a cupbearer and a baker, both imprisoned for unspecified offenses against the crown. Both have troubling dreams on the same night, and both find that the Hebrew prisoner can explain them with unsettling accuracy. The cupbearer will be restored to his post in 3 days. The baker will be executed in 3 days. Both come true exactly as Joseph said. He asks only one thing of the cupbearer in return: "Remember me when you are free." He is forgotten for 2 full years. It is Pharaoh himself who finally breaks the silence, tormented by 2 dreams no one in his court can interpret. 7 fat cows devoured by 7 gaunt ones, 7 healthy heads of grain swallowed by 7 withered ones. The cupbearer, watching his king's frustration, suddenly remembers the Hebrew prisoner who read dreams so precisely 2 years before. Joseph is pulled from prison, shaved and dressed in the Egyptian manner, and brought before the most powerful man in the ancient world. His interpretation is immediate and unflinching. 7 years of extraordinary abundance are coming, followed by 7 years of famine severe enough to erase all memory of the good years. He doesn't stop at interpretation. He advises a plan, appointing a wise administrator to collect 1/5 of the harvest during the good years and store it against the famine to come. Pharaoh's response is staggering. He doesn't simply thank Joseph. He places him second only to Pharaoh in authority over the entire land. Joseph receives Pharaoh's own signet ring, fine linen, a gold chain around his neck, an Egyptian name, Zaphanath-Paneah, and a wife, Asenath, daughter of a priest of On. He is 30 years old. The shepherd's son sold for silver is now, by any practical measure, the second most powerful man in Egypt. The 7 years of plenty come exactly as foretold, and Joseph doesn't wait in the palace to see it through. He moves across the length of Egypt, setting scribes and officials to work in every district, drawing off 1/5 of each harvest as Pharaoh commanded. The text says the grain piles up past counting, like the sand of the seashore, too much to measure. Then the famine arrives, exactly as foretold too, and it doesn't stop at Egypt's borders. It reaches into Canaan, where Jacob's family is starving alongside everyone else. Jacob sends 10 of his sons to Egypt to buy grain, keeping only the youngest, Benjamin, at home. They stand before Joseph and bow, fulfilling the dream that started this entire chain of events decades earlier, and they have no idea who he is. He recognizes them instantly. He says nothing. What follows is not an immediate reunion, but a careful, almost agonizing test, stretched across 2 visits. Joseph accuses them of spying, holds Simeon hostage, and demands they return with Benjamin to prove their honesty. On the second visit, Joseph sets one final trap, his own silver cup, planted secretly in Benjamin's grain sack. The guards find it. The penalty on the table is slavery for life, and Joseph, watching from his seat of judgment, is really asking one question. Will they abandon this younger brother the way they abandoned him? They don't. Judah steps forward, the same brother who once priced Joseph's life at 20 pieces of silver, and offers himself in Benjamin's place, rather than carry home news that would break his father a second time. That is the moment Joseph cannot hold the performance any longer. He clears the room of everyone but his brothers and weeps loudly enough that the sound carries through Pharaoh's palace. "I am Joseph," he tells them. "Is my father still alive?" What follows is reconciliation rather than revenge. Joseph brings his entire family, 70 people in all, down into Egypt to settle in the fertile region of Goshen, reunited at last with the father who believed him dead for over 20 years. Joseph would go on to live to 110 years old, the narrative's final number for a life lived out fully and well within Egypt, the country that once enslaved him. No Egyptian inscription names a vizier called Joseph, and no surviving record can be matched with certainty to his story. That needs to be said plainly before anything else, because the surrounding evidence is genuinely rich, and richness is easy to mistake for confirmation. What that evidence does show is plausibility. The Brooklyn Papyrus, a Middle Kingdom household list, records dozens of servants in an Egyptian estate bearing clearly Semitic West Asian names. Direct documentary evidence that people from Canaan were present and working inside Egyptian households around this era. At Beni Hasan, a tomb painting from around 1890 BC depicts a group of Asiatic traders entering Egypt, leading donkeys loaded with goods. It shows a different group on a different occasion, not Jacob's family, but it offers a genuine visual window into exactly the kind of Canaan to Egypt movement the Joseph narrative describes. There's also a smaller, easily missed detail worth noting. The 20 pieces of silver paid for Joseph broadly aligns with slave prices recorded in other Near Eastern texts from around the same broad era, well below the considerably higher prices recorded in later centuries. It's a small data point, but one some scholars point to as a sign the story preserves authentically old economic detail. The hyksos period, when rulers of Semitic origin controlled Lower Egypt from the city of Avaris, beginning around 1650 BC, confirmed through both Manetho's history and extensive excavation, is sometimes proposed as a backdrop making a foreign official's rapid rise more plausible. Most scholars are cautious about placing Joseph's story specifically within that period, however. and the broader question of when or whether to date the narrative to a particular era of Egyptian history remains genuinely unresolved. One claim deserves direct correction because it circulates widely online. The so-called Famine Stela, an inscription on Sahel Island describing a 7-year famine, is frequently presented as evidence for Joseph's famine. In fact, it dates from the Ptolemaic period, roughly the 2nd century BC, and retrospectively attributes that famine to the ancient Old Kingdom reign of Pharaoh Djoser, a ruler whose historical existence is well established, even though the famine story attached to him was already centuries-old folklore by the time the stela was carved. It cannot serve as contemporaneous evidence for anything in Joseph's story. What the record does support clearly is the texture of Joseph's office. The signet ring, gold collar, and fine linen described in Genesis 41 match well-documented Egyptian symbols of high administrative honor, and Egypt's vizier, or tiati, genuinely held authority second only to Pharaoh. Exactly the kind of position the text describes, even if Joseph's precise Egyptian title remains undetermined. Even the detail of his age at death, 110, mirrors the ideal lifespan praised in Egyptian wisdom literature of the period, a small but striking note of authentic Egyptian administrative color preserved in the Hebrew text. Strip away the famine records and the tomb paintings, and what remains is a story about what people do to each other inside families, and what becomes possible when the wronged party is finally given the power to retaliate and chooses something else instead. Joseph's brothers stand before him as conquered men, utterly at his mercy, and he weeps rather than punishes. That choice isn't made easier by time or distance. 20 years of grief and slavery sit behind it, not erased, just set down. The story never quite explains why he sets it down. It simply shows him doing it in a room full of people who sold him for the price of a few coins. If this story has stayed with you, Bible Stories Unearthed has a growing library of e-books that go deeper into the archaeology and history behind the biblical world. You'll find the link to our author page in the description below. Thank you for being here. This story has been told. Subscribe and return to Bible Stories Unearthed. The book is open. Let's unearth more.